One self alone exists eternally. Unborn, it admits of no creation ever. Non-objective, there is no other for that. And that is what you are. Considered to be all-pervading, yet it remains absolutely formless. Considered eternal, yet it is timeless. The realization of that is characterized by egolessness. That is the absence of the false assumption of existing as something separate from that, as an individual entity. The conception of existing as an individual entity or ego is ignorance. Abidance as the real self, which actually alone exists, is termed wisdom or knowledge. All kinds of bondage and suffering have their root in ignorance, while all freedom and peace and happiness are founded upon knowledge. Knowledge of the self is not as if one self is knowing another self, for there is only one of you. And that you that you really are, that self, is the infinite, is the eternal, is the forever unconditioned. Being changeless, forever unconditioned, is the sign of reality. If you know that within yourself, you know the truth, you know reality. Rather, reality comprehends itself, for there remains no individual I to claim I know it or I do not know it. In your real nature, you are completely detached, all permeating, yet detached from all. Such supreme detachment is the abode of bliss. Where there is detachment, there is happiness, there is peace, there is freedom, there is joy without condition or limit. Where there is attachment, there seems to be superimposed a limitation upon that innate happiness. A condition set upon joy and upon love and so forth and so on. When in your spiritual practice you become detached, you are simply knowing the truth about happiness, the truth about your own nature. When you misidentify, such is delusion. And with such delusion of misidentification, being seems as if an object, starting with the notion of I, then endowed with a mind, senses, the body, and so forth and so on. With misidentification, the consciousness that you are, which is entirely unformed and homogeneous, without subject and object, appears as if thought, appears as if sensing, appears as that which is thought of and sensed. In other words, with misidentification or delusion, the reality of the self, being consciousness-bliss, seems to be something that it can never be. And that which actually never is, seems to be as if existing. What actually never is? All differentiation, all duality, and everything from birth to death that seems to come from it. The Maharshi states quite clearly that the egoless state is our real state, the only real state that there is. That state is worldless, bodiless, mind transcendent, and utterly eyeless. That which is referred to as a state is the very nature of your existence. So that in realizing self-knowledge, it is not so much that one obtains a new state for oneself, but rather there is the recognition within oneself of what has always been the case. That is the unborn, imperishable existence, the homogeneous consciousness, the uncaused bliss. For self-realization then, for realization of the Absolute, Brahman, what is required is a very profound inquiry into one's own nature. Such discriminating inquiry yields the natural detachment, yields the natural transcendence. That is, it reveals the fact regarding your own being. Inquire deeply within yourself as to what you really are. And thereby pass beyond everything embodied, everything perceived, everything conceived, everything associated by way of limitation with the false assumption of existing as an individual being. For you are not the individual, which is but imagined, a false assumption. The imagination, as in the proverbial example of a rope seen falsely as a snake, just due to lack of good light. See the rope for what it is. Know yourself for what you truly are. You will find it to be, as is declared in the Vedas and so many other scriptures, space-like. That is, without any form. You will find that there is no place where it is not, so it is space-like. You will find that it has no interior or exterior, so it is said to be space-like. You will find that although it is in all things, it is not in anything, so it is called space-like. You will find, though, that everything is in it, yet nothing is in it, so it is said to be like space. You will find it to be without limitation, without change, without division, without motion. And so they have called it space-like. Now and always, that space-like consciousness the reality of pure being is what you are. That being is neither a thing nor an activity. Know it for yourself by inquiring within yourself, who am I? The Upanishads declare Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Find out the truth of it within yourself. And if at any point you have a question, feel free to ask. Or if you wish to relate your own experience, please feel free to speak.
On a walk this weekend, on a night where coincidences seem to pile up, I passed by these three people on bicycles. Very late at night, I said, isn't it a beautiful night? Because it was. And one man said, beautiful night for a stabbing. Thought that was a bit odd. And as I was walking after that, I was meditating. I usually meditate when I walk, asking the universe to protect anyone from any stabbing that night that might happen. And not too long after that, on the walk, I heard this voice yelling, I'm going to stab myself. A man going crazy who had a knife to his wrist, talking about his wife cheating on him. I stopped and talked to him and told him that there are lots of beautiful people in the world and beautiful places and beautiful things. Told him whatever came to me to tell him to stop him from doing this to himself. And then when I felt he was calmed, I left. And I felt it ended up that my meditation earlier of asking that the universe protect anyone from the stabbing that night led me to possibly protecting this man from stabbing himself. I'm not sure I have a question exactly about that. Other than, I guess, to ask how that might relate with the teachings of spirituality and how my meditation to ask for help led me to be helped.
When you say you prayed to the universe, you were not merely praying to the inert matter in it, were you?
No.
So what is it that you were referring to as the universe?
Actually, he's what I call Bodhaya. He's a protector.
Okay.
And the universe, both of them. The universe is it's a collection of all.
Something that protects, something that is all. something that is not unintelligent or inert, otherwise you would not expect an answer. Inasmuch as you referred to it as universe, it is something very vast. So that when you recognize the existence, prayer is recognition, existence of some power, some conscious principle that is quite vast, which even is evident in your own activities, is given credit for all life and death. Which can protect, but also, as you know, dissolves all things. When you have such recognition, there's a diminishing of what you regard as you. There's the diminishing of the ego, isn't there?
Yes, very much so.
Out of the recognition of something that is absolute and the diminishing of your ego comes everything that's true, good, and beautiful. Consequently, your later interaction. Now, we don't have to wait for something so dramatic to abide in that which dissolves the false sense of ego. When we no longer wait, we find that that which we call upon in time of need is actually there all the time. When we see it is there all the time, then prayer changes from solicitation to reflection upon its omnipresence. When contemplation upon its omnipresence and the like passes beyond attributes and transcends even the thinking of the mind, it becomes meditation. When meditation becomes quintessential in its introspection, it becomes atma-vichara or self-inquiry. When the inquiry penetrates deeply to the core of one's being, so that one's being is found to be that which was originally prayed to, the Absolute. And then the statements of such as Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, strike home.
You said today, speaking of dispassion, that dispassion comes from the certainty as to the source of happiness. It's very clear. To get this certainty, what the seeker really has to do is to inquire to know that which is resting within himself. It seems that has to be where the knowledge comes from that makes dispassion the natural response. So again, I want to be very clear on this because for me this seems the crux of the matter.
If we know what the source of happiness is, if we know what the source of our desire for happiness is, if we know what the substance of the experience of happiness is, and we find all these to be the same within, that is the nature of the experiencer, then to what would we be attached? In addition, as you allude to, happiness is not complete unless it is lasting. Everyone desires happiness, and they do not desire it just for a brief moment, they desire it always. Such is an intuition that bliss and immortality are our own nature. Examine your own experience. Whenever you are attached to something, and by something it could be a subtle thought, to an activity, to a circumstance, to an object, to another person, what have you. Whenever you are attached, what is your view of happiness?
The stronger the attachment, the more limited is the happiness.
The more the attachment, the less happiness is experienced. The more there's limitation imposed upon it. When we're detached, it is because we know the causeless nature of happiness. We do not expect anything to give it to us, nor are we in need of it from anywhere else. Your withinness itself, your own existence, is the happiness desired.
So you have happiness, and then you don't have to go seeking it.
So one who knows the source of happiness is detached, and his own detachment guarantees the solidity or the unwavering character of his happiness. It is the same thing as misidentification. Just when that misidentification is in terms of thoughts or the body, we say this is misidentifying. When it's in terms of mixing up one's own happiness with objects in the world, it's called attachment. It's the same silliness at work. Likewise, inwardly speaking, what yields detachment also yields disidentification. We could say detachments of two kinds. One is the one of which we are speaking now, that which is obtained by discerning where happiness is. The other kind of detachment is supreme detachment. It is abidance in that, as that, in which nothing else has ever come to be. That is the self. It is not attached to anything at any time, for there is nothing beside it. Therefore, the attachment is not attained, and the detachment is not attained, and the attachment was also never attained. The first leads to the second.
It's been been a lot of confusion this last week since the retreat, and I'm not even sure I can express what it is that causes, upset. But I'll try. Last at the retreat, I was falling asleep. I was getting very drowsy a lot. And I was letting it slip by like it was all right. Because after all, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, and I didn't want to do like a self-examination of my action there. And so this week I was troubled by the fact that I felt that it was incorrect to be doing that, to be falling asleep, when so much knowledge is presented. And so I was reading a little book by Kunja Swami about Ramana Maharshi, who had disguised himself so that he could go to this temple and worship something or other, and then he felt bad about what he had done. And I go to myself, well, why would he feel bad if he's identified with the self, which is perfect? Why, if he's totally identified with the self and it's perfect, why would he feel bad? It was as if he were identifying with a mind-body, about having done something wrong. But for whom is this something wrong? If he's the self, then why is he upset about what he did? And yet that's what I do a lot. I'm constantly observing what I do all the time. But sometimes I miss things and I sort of don't address them, some things that don't feel quite right to me. But then I'm thinking, well, I'm happy, I'm okay. It's okay to be a little off. And so I'm just kind of confused about what's operating here. Is it the ego that wants to be perfect in everything that it does, or is that coming from the self, which is all good and beautiful and everything and expresses that? So
Your question assumes something you may want to. Your question assumes something you may wish to examine. Part of your question assumes that to examine oneself or be engaged in constant examination of oneself or the manifestations in the mind, etc., would be ego forming, and ignoring such or not engaging in self-examination would be ego dissolution. You may want to examine that concept to see if it bears out in experience. The second point I'd mention is I believe your paraphrasing of the story about the Maharshi is probably lacking in certain respects, either because what you're quoting from Kunja Swami is out of context, or perhaps the book in which you're reading it is not clear. And so you've supposed that Maharshi was feeling bad about himself or depressed in some way or another. You may want to re-examine what's written about that. Well, the story is, from the outset, a little humorous that he went in disguise. Tell me how someone who wore only a loincloth for his entire renounced life goes in disguise. Difficult. Aside from changing maybe the Shiva marks, there's not going to be a whole lot of disguising. So, in any event, you may wish to re-examine that passage and get it in context, rather than assuming the Maharshi was subject to emotional moods, which you may find was not the case at all. One who's transcendent of thought doesn't even have the stuff out of which to make moods. more importantly for yourself, since the Maharshi takes care of himself just fine, is to, as I mentioned initially, to consider deeply whether you want to maintain the approach that to examine yourself through critical discrimination inquiry would build up the ego, while to be oblivious of such would take down the ego. You might find that that's an inverted view.
So not to be oblivious, but to, can you say that again?
Your question assumed that if you would examine the workings of your own mind, this would build up the ego. The ego, which is after all but a false supposition. And that to not so inquire and to examine would maintain the ego in a dissolved state or a state of abeyance or keep it down. You may want to seriously reconsider that proposition. You can do so in the light of the instructions of the Maharshi himself about the destruction of vasanas or mental tendencies, or any Vedantic work for that matter, or a host of other spiritual texts, or you may wish to examine your own experience and see how that works, or if it works at all. What was suggested is the view might be inverted entirely. In other words, you might find that self-examination never does any harm. The worst thing that can possibly happen when you examine yourself is that you find out you were already right, so you didn't learn anything. That's the worst. Other than that, you can find some tendency, some vasana, some misidentification or attachment, as we were speaking of earlier, and being aware of it, inquire, and liberate yourself from it. As for falling asleep or not, that is of no concern here. Because you are that which transcends all three states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. And the thoughts and mental waves and emotions that appear within those three states. You are that which silently witnesses those three states, and in truth never enters into those states. That is, you are that which is undefined, but whatever you conceive of in your waking state, in your dreaming state, and even the emptiness of deep sleep, you are not.
I feel that I would ask for grace to always be able to see if there's a deviance from truth, to always be able to see that and correct it. Because I can feel there's danger in just falling off of that. And just say, that's fine, I'm fine, everything's fine, when it isn't really representative of total self-abidance.
That's clear.
To always have that fluidity, to be able to see and correct.
You see all the time anyway. There is nothing mysterious about ignorance or about knowledge. When you, in imagination, concoct some ignorant concept, and then act upon it. Don't you know about it? If you did not know about it, how could you bind yourself with it? And how could you act upon it? You do know. Our ignorance, so-called, is only formally so. We actually always know. Self-examination, self-inquiry, simply reveal what we already know.
And to have the forbearance or the power to be able to know and see that and stay there, rather than falling into the tendency as if one were out of control with it, just to stay still.
Depth of inquiry is what's required. If it's fueled by the intensity of purpose, that is, the intense desire for liberation, there's not really found to be obstacles of that kind. Moreover, what higher state of grace could you desire than to have your inquiry be constant? For if your inquiry is constant, your knowledge is constant. And then it becomes self-evident that it is the knowledge itself which is innate that appeared in the form of the inquiry.
So in other words, that's what I'm asking for, not for how I stated it, but more like.
What you're asking for, you're already endowed with. Use it.
And so, just one more thing. The other night I had a dream where I had parked my car. And the car generally is one's body, one's mind. It was parked on the corner. And it was, so this policeman came to give me a ticket because I was parked in the wrong spot. And it would be blocking anybody coming from around the corner. So it gives me the ticket, and then when he goes to give me the ticket, it gives me a whole bunch of tickets. So my question is this the self correcting itself, or is it coming from some ego sense of having done something wrong?
There are more direct ways of realizing the truth than attempting to analyze the echoes and images of your dreams. The consciousness which knows the entire happenings of all the dreams never itself appears as a thing in the dreams. The same is so even now in the waking state, which can be regarded as another dream. Find out the truth of that consciousness and identify with it.
Thank you, Master. Sometimes in the holy texts and teachings of the sages, a simple analogy will be used that sometimes seems very practical to me. Sometimes it's used in the context of there's no reason to repeat as an assertion, a mental assertion, mahavakyas or anything like that. And it might be the Maharshi in times has used this in other sages, like if someone does not have to, an ordinary human being from that perspective does not have to say, I am a human being. because it's an unquestioned, quote, experience for them, even though it's not really. But for them, they think that there's that experience. And if someone was dreaming that they were a cow or something and woke up in a fever delirium still with that thought, they would only have to say, that's crazy, I'm just not a cow, and then it would be done.
As well as wipe off any of the remaining hay that's in the mouth.
Right. And stop eating grass and stop running with the herd and start taking care of the things that lead him to that assumption.
I'm just kidding.
No, I know. But I mean, you could take it, it becomes a little fun, but sometimes it seems that mistaking the objective to be the subjective, to take the known to be the knower, is for me something that even on a simple mental level can help snap me out of that. It's not inquiry yet, but what I wanted to ask was does that seem like a useful self-remembrance to have, and then to go and inquire. But the cow-human difference for me is the sharp separation between identifying with the objective known and then the remembrance of the teaching of sages that the real can only be the subjective knower, and then trying to fathom what that means.
It is from the knowledge of the subjective knower that the mahavakyas were declared. The great sayings such as, thou art that, supreme consciousness is Brahman, I am Brahman, the self is Brahman. They are statements of direct realization or direct experience. So what we do is we don't repeat them, as you pointed out, but we get to the truth of them. The truth of them is your nature. In the statement, I am Brahman, what is the I? In the statement, Tattvamasi, that you are, what is the Tvam? What is the you? You can see in your experiences described by you, there's the knower, there's the known. Known includes cows as well as human body, etc. Eliminate from your sense of identity the known from the knower. What remains?
Well, you used the term space-like. That's one thing that seems pretty appropriate.
All right. This is your experience. The mental activities, your thoughts, which have innumerable permutations, are all the known, aren't they? For whom are the thoughts? Who knows them?
They're not known by some other thought that I put my name on.
All right, so one thought doesn't know another thought, and the thoughts are not self-known. They're not self-luminous, nor do they light each other up. Nor do they exist apart from the one who knows them. Though the one who knows them exists quite distinct from them. Who is the knower? This inquiry cannot be mental, can it?
No, those would be more thoughts. Back with those herd of cows there.
The whole herd going by. Bunch of thoughts grazing. But they are not you, are they? None of your thoughts, not one of them, that has ever been thought has been you. None of them are a definition for your nature. So you can be quite sure that whatever you think of yourself, that you are not. What remains?
there are times when I seem to catch a story that I'm telling myself, and it dissolves into what seems like a space light. Just seems to dissolve into space. But it's only for a while. And there doesn't seem much bliss in it, there's peace. But I wondered if that was on the right path with it, what that was. Is it just another thought?
In your experience, does it seem like just another thought?
No, it actually seems like, but it might be an I thing, because it seems to be like dissolving into a cosmic space, just like that. When I'm able to catch it and trip it, kind of thing.
How much is just a story? Just your daydreams?
No, it's
Your entire personality?
I wish.
The idea that you have a bodily life?
Yes, the idea that I have a bodily life.
So the dream commences with the idea that you've been born.
Yes, it all comes from that.
And everything based upon that, including the personality that you wish or dream, is just as much a story as that idea that you were born. Regard a story as just a story then, and be thorough with what you regard as a story. Only that which is not dependent on the conceptions of the mind is not a story. Only that which is self-existent, which has a non-dependent existence, is not a story. If you go deeply with this into your own nature, which alone is not a story, you'll find that which the mind at times calls bliss, and at times calls peace, and at times calls something else, but really which is quite beyond description.
Can I use that dissolving to go deeper?
What else is depth but dissolution?
Yes. I just need to go to dissolve more deeply.
All right. We don't really use dissolution, do we? The we dissolves. The way is always non-objective. Dissolve whatever you regard as you. That which is truly you is unborn and indestructible.
And beautiful and good.
Yes, and quite beyond the story.
I've been meditating on this thing that we read Friday night, and it was actually a simple kind of passage where Maharshi says, in deep sleep, you existed as you were. So find out what is different in this state, right? Something like that. That was good. I don't know. Anyway, I've been trying to look into this, and what I noticed though is different than what I experience here. Here, I come and it feels like there's a fullness. Now, when I feel like I discover something, there's a fullness behind it. Whereas when I was meditating earlier, it seemed like it wasn't defined. I couldn't find, it wasn't a bad state because I didn't feel defined. I would go, okay, well, let's see what's here. But it seems like there's also this fullness that isn't, I don't know how to describe it. So it seems like, at least what I was kind of just meditating on, is that there is more identity that I have to dissolve or just, question.
Sri Bhagavan points out that you exist, always, in deep sleep, as you do now. In deep sleep, there is no experience of the manifestations of an ego, of a mind, of a body, and so forth and so on, of a world. Now these things appear, but your existence remains the same. Those things come and go according to the state of mind. Existence remains the same. So we know from that the existence cannot be anything defined within those states. Hence, it cannot be anything confined within those states. The existence is immutable. Unchangingness is the sign of reality. If something appears to change its nature, it is an illusion. An illusion is that which is not.
Yeah, because without the mind, because in deep sleep there's no mind. So everything in the mind is like gone. So whatever.
But you still exist.
Yeah.
And your existence will not change. Otherwise, it's not your existence. It would go out of existence, which is absurd. It is impossible for you to imagine a state of non-existence. Existence always is and always knows itself. That which always knows itself and is existing by itself, as referred to in deep sleep, is the only thing that you are all the time. That itself is the Puranam, or perfect fullness. Variations in states are according to the mind. What is the mind?
Seems like the mind is contingent on me, on my belief, I guess, in who I am. If there's a belief in something, then there's a mind.
So the mind depends on you.
Yeah.
But you don't depend on it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, because the mind can be totally gone in deep sleep.
But you still are. Does the mind have any existence whatsoever apart from you?
Yeah, that is an important question.
Does the mind ever declare it is, or do you say it is?
Yeah, it doesn't come out. Say, I've now found the mind.
What has only a dependent existence actually has no existence at all. It is something else being misperceived or erroneously called that thing. What is the real nature of your mind?
So, can I ask a question about that? Because it seems like some of it is not, I guess the way mind you're using it is not just a thought, but the one who has the thoughts. Is that true?
Well, you can look at it that way. What you call your mind is a combination of the thought and the one who has or knows the thoughts.
Or the thoughts would be pertaining to, I guess.
Well, they don't pertain to other thoughts. If they do, they have nothing to do with you.
Yeah, that's true, right? They definitely don't pertain.
You can either see that thoughts only pertain to other thoughts, they have nothing to do with you, and you can go happily on your way without thought from then on. That's a fine approach.
Okay, say that again?
You can see that thoughts only have to do with other thoughts and have nothing to do with you, so you can go happily on your way, abiding as the self, and the mind won't trouble you ever again. That's one approach. Another approach is to see your mind as a combination of the one who knows it or appears to have it and the form of the thought. The one who knows it is of the nature of pure consciousness. The form of thought depends entirely on the consciousness, even in order to appear. So it is only that consciousness appearing in the guise of that. That is to say, the nature of your mind is consciousness. What form or what wave does your consciousness have? Then you find there's no such thing as a mind.
Seems like that. A lot of it is just assumptions.
All of samsara is like that.
In other words, there's nothing tangible. It's just assumed. I mean, at least what I'm getting from this conversation is I had this assumption. It was unquestioned. And so it had...
All of samsara, the repetitive cycle of birth and death and all the experience pertaining thereto, is only that false assumption, imagination. So the scriptures refer to it as maya, illusion. The Maharshi says maya is that which is not. That is, it has no existence whatsoever, not even a temporary existence. If we know the nature of maya, it ceases to exist for us.
Would you please repeat that? If we know the nature of Maya,
it ceases to exist for us.
didn't get it yet.
If we know the nature of Maya or illusion, then we find that there is no such thing as Maya existing.
I see.
And Maya would be any assumption.
Is there one you wanted to retain?
No, actually. It seems like that just leads to suffering.
All right, so suffering has its root in delusion only, not in reality. Therefore, if you know yourself, reality comprehends itself, and suffering is abolished. Such elimination of the imagined bondage is called liberation.
Yes. But it's, everything kind of, it's really strange because without knowing the self, and it goes back to your discourse, right? Because the self itself is bliss. But when it's not seen, I may believe it's outside objective.
Who is the I? Who is the one who does not see? Explanations of Maya or ignorance are just expedient teaching for the truth to be self-revealed within you. There can in truth be nothing real about a description of that which has never come to be.
अहङ्कारकलात्यागे समताया समुद्गमे विशरारौ कृते चित्ते तुर्यावस्थोपतिष्ठते.
When the ego portion is abandoned, identity, sameness, comes forth, or is arisen together, and the mind is in dissolution, is dispersed. One places himself in, stands in, exposes himself to the fourth stage.
Siddhantodhyatmashastrāṇam sarvāpah eva hi navidyāsti no maya shantam brahmodamaklamam.
The settled conclusion of the scriptures pertaining to the self is, indeed, certainly, the denial of everything, or that all is only a concealment of the truth. No ignorance is here, no illusion. This Brahman is peace and freedom from fatigue, or Brahman is this, peace and freedom from fatigue.
Shanta eva chidakashe swachhe shamasamatmani samasta shakti khachite brahmeti kalitabhide.
Peace alone, the space of consciousness in utter clarity, is one who is tranquil and the same in the self, prominent with all powers combined, complete, and is provided with name of Brahman thus.
Sarvameva parityajya mahamoni bhavanakha nirvanavan nirmananaha kshinachitta prashantadhihi.
Abandoning all, indeed, O faultless one, be a great silent sage, one endowed with nirvana, devoid of thinking, reflection, mind destroyed, with the wisdom, the meditation, the intelligence of supreme peace.
Atmanyeva svashantatma Mukandabadhiropamaha Nityamantarmukha swachchaha Swatmananta prapurnadhihi.
In the self alone be the peaceful self, resembling one who is dumb, mute, deaf, and blind, ever inward turned, the very clear, the transparency, by one's own inner self, with the supremely, perfectly full wisdom.
Jagratyeva sushuptasthaha Kuru karmani vaidvija Antas sarva parityagi Bahikuru yatha gatam.
In abidance in waking deep sleep, indeed perform action, certainly, O twice born, internally abandoning all, externally act, then according to occurrences.
Chitta satta param dukkham Chittatyaga param sukham Ataschittam chidakashe Nayakshayamavedanad.
The existence of the mind is supreme suffering. Abandonment of the mind is supreme happiness. Hence, lead the mind to its destruction by non-knowledge in the space of consciousness, or hence lead the mind into the space of consciousness by the destruction of non-knowledge.
Drishtva ramyam va stheyam pashanavat sada etavatatmayatnena jita bhavati samsritihi.
Having seen the enjoyable and the disagreeable, one should ever firmly abide like a stone to such extent of self-effort that worldly existence, the course of transmigration, is conquered.
Vedante paramam guhyam Purakalpa prachoditam Na prashantaya datavyam Na putraya shishyaya vaipunaha.
The supreme secret in Vedanta, proclaimed in ancient times, is to be communicated not to those lacking in peacefulness, not to one who is not a son, or again, not to one who is not a disciple.
Annapurna Upanishadam Yodhite kurvanugrahat Sajivan muktatam prapya Brahmaiva bhavati swayam Ityupanishad.
He who learns, knows the Annapurna Upanishad by the grace of the Guru, he attains the state of liberation in life. He becomes, is, Brahman alone himself. Thus the Upanishad.